Hello and welcome to CPU Architecture Part 2. So in this video, we're going to look through how is data transferred from the CPU to the memory and to our peripherals, the input and output devices. So we're going to look at the architecture within the system buses. We've got the control bus, the address bus, and the data bus. So, the data will go from the CPU to the control bus and back again. Then from the CPU to the address bus, and the CPU to the data bus. Then we go from the address bus to the memory. And from the memory to the control bus and back again. From the data bus to the memory and back again. Input and output devices move data from the control bus to the input devices and the output devices, then from the input to the control bus again. And the address bus to the input and output devices and back again. And input and output devices to the data bus and back again. Is that clear? Do you think that's enough to, pass your exam? And exactly how is the data transferred? Well, if you're not sure, watch this video and we'll dive a little bit deeper. So as you saw in my introduction, so we got the CPU, we have the memory, we have the input and output devices. And you saw the arrows going through, the different kinds of buses. Well, what are the buses? What exactly are they? We take our computers for granted. So, the information will come from Netflix onto our screens. But exactly how does this happen? Every time we tap something into the keyboard or plug something into our computer, all these instructions and these addresses are all being processed at this time. And we don't think about it. So let's get to know it a little bit better. Let's get to know our computer a little bit more. So, now, the bus is simply a set of wires, and they just transfer the data or the power between the components inside our computer. So inside our computer, as you know, we've got a motherboard, and there's several components on that motherboard. One of them, for example, being the brain of the computer, the CPU. So how does all this information get from, say, a microphone, like my microphone, to the CPU, and then to the video? So we're going to take a look into that. So a bus can connect several peripherals together. So the peripherals are the things that are plugged into your computer that make it better. Okay, so if you look at the desktop computer in your classroom, you can see the keyboard's connected to it, the mouse is connected to it, and the monitor's connected to it. And these are all connected to the tower. So the bus will connect these peripherals together to make them work. So then when you type something in onto the keyboard, it comes out onto your monitor. Now, the buses will need a clock. Okay, and that's not a clock to say which time it is. Like, for example, it may be 11:30. Okay, this is a clock to say which instruction should be processed and when it should be processed and how many should be processed per second. Okay, and the reason for this is because we need our computers to work efficiently. Now, for them to work efficiently, the instructions need to run in an order of sequence, and they need to run within a certain time, because we don't want our computers to run too slow, and we don't want our instructions to be processed too fast, basically causing chaos. So, now the buses have a clock. So what is the bus clock? So whilst the CPU is busy cycling through its programs, okay, the data needs to be moved around the computer by means of data buses. Okay, so Now, each of these buses will run with their own clocks, okay, saying this time this should happen, that time that should happen. So, like, for example, the way we need to look at this is that you guys all come into school. So there's several of you coming to school at once. You all come into school at the same time. Imagine, for example, the Agora could be the CPU. Okay, so when I say the Agora, for anybody that's not in my school watching this, so imagine all of the students going to the main area of the school, such as the hall. Okay, the bell then goes. You guys need to all disperse somewhere. So you all go to your different form bases, and the register is taken, then the bell goes again. So imagine this is like the bus clock, and then you all need to go to different parts of the building all at once, because, for example, the school needs to run and everybody needs to be in lessons at the same time, but you can't all be in the same lesson. So imagine if the bell goes and all of the students all decide they're all going to go to history. Then that will cause chaos, and the teacher may need to teach several different history lessons at the same time. Well, that can't happen. So it's the same thing with your instructions on your computer. These buses are all running with their own clocks, and all the instructions need to be moved around the computer by the data bus at different times and run in order of sequence. None of them can be late, okay, and none of them can be early. So each time the clock pulses, like for example in school, each time the bell goes, the data is transferred. So every time the bell goes, the students are transferred to go where they need to go. So let's look at the address bus now. Now, the address bus, we could think of this as like a postman for the computer. So it's a component that carries an address to the memory controller to identify a location in the memory which needs to be read from or written to. So imagine like your postman. So for example, your postman will go to the depot, pick up your letter, read on your letter what it says, okay, the address, and deliver it to your house. Okay, or maybe you could think of it, if you wanted something a little bit more exciting, a carrier pigeon, or like that the owl in Harry Potter. Okay, so that's all an address bus is. It's I would say it's like the postman of the computer. So it sees the memory control of the address, identifies its location, and simply takes the letter there, or takes the instruction there. Now, let's look further into the address bus. So looking at our details right here, as we can see, you've got the address bus and it's got an arrow that leads to the memory. So this isn't multi-directional, okay? This is just going in one direction. So as I said, think of this like your postman. So you don't send a letter back to your postman, do you? No, of course you don't. The letter goes in one direction only, and that's to your house. So it has the sole function, and it's to carry an address. So it carries it. It's not a storage, okay? So this is not a storage device. Like your postman doesn't store your letters. Your postman simply carries them. Okay, and then the address is simply passed from the address bus to the memory address register. And there it specifies the location where it's due to be received. And then obviously at some point when it's ready, it receives that data. Okay, so as I said, it's one-way street, and the memory simply goes to the location. Now we're looking at bus widths. So a bit like your school bus, okay, the width will matter, okay, but not necessarily the length, okay. So now, as I said earlier, these are just merely a bunch of wires, okay. So just because the wire's longer, it doesn't mean to say that the data is going to take longer to get there. It literally depends on the width of it. So it's a very important aspect, okay. It's simply a case of not how long the bus is, but to do with the number of wires in that bus. If there isn't enough wires, then the computer won't work efficiently. Okay, so here's an example. we can see where the address buses are right here. Okay, so you can see the memory and you can see how many wires there are. So it's nothing to do with length. Okay, because the CPU is where the CPU is, the ROM is where the ROM is, and so is where the RAM is. And these are the wires here that carry the data. So the more wires, the faster it works. Now, let's go further into why it's important. Now, the number of wires simply equal the number of bits in the address binary code. Okay, so here's an example. If the bus width is 16 wires, it will allow over 65,000 memory locations to be directly addressed. Now, you may think that's a lot, but with how powerful modern computers are today and how information has become a commodity, as well as the fact that we don't just use our computers, we use them for absolutely everything: socializing, entertainment, work, information, everyday tasks such as banking. That is an awful lot of instructions. It's just simply wouldn't be adequate. Okay, so now even if we were to double the width size to 32, this will allow over 4 billion addresses. Okay, so if our wires were 32, okay, then it allow over 4 billion addresses, and maybe even by today's standards that may still not be enough. So now we're going to take a look at the data bus. Now, this is a component that carries the data to and from the processor. Think of this as your school bus. Okay, so your school bus collects you at your location, brings you to school, then takes you back again. Okay, and you are the data. Okay, so you're the data. So you go to school, which we could say is the CPU, and then back again maybe to the memory. Okay, so now here's a key word that you're going to need to focus on, and that's called word. And I don't mean word as in the words as you know them. Okay, the words are simply a small number of bytes. Okay, so a very small number of bytes, so we just call it a word, and it's handled as a unit by the computer system. Okay, unit meaning as one thing. So what is our data bus? Now, this carries the data. It doesn't store it, it carries it. And this could be an instruction, an address, or a value from the CPU to the memory and back again. So as I said, imagine this a school. This is your home, and the school bus takes you to school and then takes you home again. Now, another option, okay, is for the data to be carried to an input or an output device. So depending on the computer, the data can be input to the CPU before it's stored to the memory, and then it can be directly transferred. Okay, so that's another. So obviously, the data obviously does need to go from the CPU to the memory, but it also needs to go to our output devices because we need to see it too. Okay, so it could go to, for example, the monitor, or it could go to the speakers. Now, there is an importance of bus width, okay, but it's not necessarily a major factor because of its nature of use. But the computer still needs to make a decision. Okay, so depending on the number of bytes there are, how big the word is, the computer needs to make a decision to handle it as one group or more than one group. If it's one group and it's too big, it may take longer to be transferred, which isn't, by today's standards, sufficient. So the computer then needs to make a decision as to whether it should break it down into more than one group and then transfer it so it can actually get to the memory or to the CPU or to your output device quicker. Now, I'm going to take a look at the control bus, and then we're going to discuss CPUs. Not CPUs, sorry, I mean USBs. So it's a bus that a computer uses in a CPU to communicate with the devices that are contained within that computer. Okay, so this is more internal. So as you know, there's devices inside your computer. So we got, the ports, we've got the memory, and this is what's used to communicate. So now this occurs for the physical connections. So as you know, you've got cables inside your computer. So if you look inside of a computer, there's several cables and there's printed circuits, because motherboards are actually printed, and there's wires that are printed on that motherboard. Okay, the circuit, and the electricity runs through them and the instructions run through them. Now the CPU transmits a variety of control signals to the components and their devices, and one of the main objectives is to minimise the lines that are needed for communication, and this is so that the communication can take place much quicker. Now obviously this has to permit the communication between the devices using one data channel, so the control bus is multi-directional, and it synchronised the controls and the signals into the internal devices. That obviously has to go to the external components. So an example of maybe of an internal device would be your sound card. So without your sound card, then you can't get sound through the speakers. Okay, your graphics card will communicate with your monitor, so then you can actually see the graphics that are on your monitor right now. Obviously there has to be interrupt lines. There has to be a queuing system for the instructions so that they can be executed at the right time, okay, which is very important. Now, the bus is typically 8 wires, okay. Now the width apparently is not a major factor, but if there isn't enough wires, then obviously the performance is limited. Okay, so for example, if you've got a very powerful graphics card, okay, inside your computer, then you're going to need a CPU that can keep up with that. Okay, so then it can come, obviously it can all come through your monitor, and obviously you might need a monitor that can support a powerful graphics card. So each input and output device is connected to the port, and then the port is connected simply to the device controllers. This is how the communication works. So the USB. I think I skipped an instruction there. Okay, sorry, yes, the controller will handle the interaction between the CPU and the device. Apologies. Now, the Universal Serial Bus. They're part of our everyday lives, and maybe you take them for granted. Okay, but if, for example, in my school, if you take a look at some of the keyboards and the mouse, they're not necessarily all connected through Universal Serial Bus, but a majority of connections are. Like the microphone that I'm using now is a USB microphone. Now, an alternative to the USB is a FireWire, but they're not very common. Personally, I don't think I've ever encountered one or used one. Now, the USB is a wonderful plug-in and play concept. So the idea is that it takes away some technical detail. Now, it has 5 volts of electricity that runs through it, and that's how it works as a plug-in and play. And as I said, it removes the need for technical knowledge. So one time, if you bought a device such as a printer, I think I remember doing this many years ago, but with my first computer, I bought a printer, and with that printer, obviously we needed to use the cables to connect the printer to the tower, but I think I had to actually install drivers myself and put in the details of my computer. Now, the idea of USB is it takes away all that. Okay, so like for example, with my microphone that I'm using right now to record these videos, is all I did was I took the microphone out of the case, plugged it into the USB port of my laptop recognises it, and I use it. Okay, there's no need for installing, and there's no need for me to restart my computer. Okay, so it uses a hierarchy of connection support. Okay, so this is when it sends the information through as and when I need it. And obviously the computer is the root of that hierarchy, so it all begins there as the central figure. So, and apparently a computer can handle up to 127 connected devices. So the devices are connected whilst the computer is switched on. So as I said to you, it is simply plug in and play. I didn't need to plug in my microphone and then restart my computer so it could boot up and process the instructions. Then I could use my microphone. I could simply plug it in and it uses it. So now USBs are constantly evolving, and the newer one at the moment, the newer standard, is 3.0. If you take a look on my channel, I do have a video that explains exactly how USBs work, and I go beyond the syllabus where I explain each USB that has become available or that is becoming available. Right, thank you for watching. If you are my student, you now need to complete the homework tasks in your homework book. Please do subscribe and like my videos. Teachers, visit my shop on Tess and follow me on Twitter. Thank you very much.